Hi guys! So I thought I would do a video for you on some books that I've read this year. Seeing as how we're coming to the close of the year, I thought this was a really good opportunity to sort of go through my Goodreads report that just came out and pull out a few of my favorites that I've read throughout the year and share them with you. So this video, I'm going to share my top 5 favorite nonfiction books. So I would say historically nonfiction has been my favorite genre, and so I do tend to read quite a few. It was really hard for me to pick 5 of them, actually. I read a lot of really good ones this year. We may do another video of some honorable mentions later, but these are the top 5 that I would highly recommend reading if you're at all interested in the topics or just nonfiction books in general. I'm going to rank these from my top to the 5th. And honestly, in some situations and in some moods, these could shift very easily. They're all so good. The number 1 book on my list this year was Catch and Kill by Ronan Farrow. Now, this book had a lot of coverage, and I'm sure everyone's heard about it. If not, you've at least heard the stories that it's about. And the reason I picked this, it was very well written. I thought Ronan Farrow did a very good job in his reporting. This one is a strong representation of journalistic reporting at its best, I would say. But so if you haven't heard what it's about, Ronan Farrow worked very hard to break the Harvey Weinstein story. I think that was 2 years ago, 2017. And this is sort of his synopsis of what that process looked like for him as a journalist, and the battles he had to fight to really tell the stories of these women. And so while it centers on that, there's a much broader element to it that I think is really important. And that is just how much backlash and how much fighting he had to do in order to even tell the story. Even though he had the women that were willing to talk and he had all the details, they did not want this story out. And so I think this shows how important journalistic integrity is, and how much we should appreciate what journalists do to be able to bring stories to us, and sometimes at a very high personal risk. So for that reason, I think that's an important read. Even if you really know the Harvey Weinstein story, you followed it, or even the Matt Lauer story. There's a lot about, kind of what went on with Matt Lauer, and some other, very seedy aspects. But very good book, very important read, I think. So number 2 on my list was not published this year, but I only read it this year, and that is Bad Blood by John Carreyrou. And that is the story of Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes, and the whole situation that was unfolding, how everyone was so caught up in the hype of this Silicon Valley startup that was going to change the medical industry, and it ended up just being all a complete hoax. Just a facade, a great show of salesmanship, and there was just the cover-ups that were going on to protect the secrets and the lies that Elizabeth Holmes and this very tight team of people that she had around her, that, you know, very loyal team that were protecting her. And so again, another one of those very like journalistic, investigative books. I would say this one, while the topic is very interesting, it may not be for everyone. This one can read a little dry. It's not got a lot of story driven aspect to it. It's a lot of detail, you know, interviews, but it can feel a little clinical at times. I personally don't mind that if it's a topic that warrants that, and I think in this situation it kind of did. But others, like I've known other people that tried to read it and just struggled because they just felt it was hard for them to kind of really get stuck into and stay focused on. So that's number 2. Number 3, I just finished this book last week and it was so good. It's called Broke by Jodi Adams Kirshner, and it is the story of Detroit. And we all know Detroit claimed bankruptcy a few years ago, and so it's a little bit of a story about that, like broke in the sense that the cash was dried up, it was gone. And so it tells a story about how that happened, you know, the Kwame Kilpatrick era and all of the mismanagement of funds over the years that created the scenario. But it also tells us the story of a broken city. And that story starts back much further. You know, it really kind of looks back towards what was going on just before the race riots in the 1960s there in Detroit, and what kind of occurred in the city since then. And even in this era of bankruptcy, what's really interesting is we hear the stories on the news about the rebuilding of Detroit. You know, it's kind of turned into this sort of metaphorical phoenix from the ashes. You know, Dan Gilbert investing, especially in the Corktown area, and rebuilding Detroit. But what they don't talk about is the neighborhoods that are still just in such blight, and the people who have lived there their whole lives, and how hard it is for them to remain living there. The city has not treated them well, and the rebuild is not considering them. And that's kind of what this book goes into. So there's a little bit about, you know, the financial, and there's a lot about just the hardship of the city. So very much like Evicted, if you read that one, that's another one I'll kind of throw in as a bonus. I also read Evicted this year that was very good. Very similar style. So Evicted, if you don't know, is by Matthew Desmond, and it focuses on what's going on in Milwaukee, which again, same region pretty much, and it talks about some of the issues going on with housing in the Milwaukee area especially. So check that one out too. But in a very similar vein, they both, while telling the overarching story, follow individuals or families that are dealing with these situations, either as someone who, like in Evicted, who is a landlord, or someone who is a renter. In Broke, it could be someone who's trying to live in Detroit, or it could be someone who's buying the houses and trying to rent them or renovate them, trying to do something as far as like investing in the city. So, you know, you kind of get those personal stories thrown in. So it unlike, you know, some other books, like Bad Blood that's very clinical. This one has a lot of detail, but a lot of story. It really pulls at your heart, this one. So if you're at all interested in reading more about that, highly recommend. Brand new. In fact, I think it just came out in November. And again, by Jodi Adams Kirshner. And so number 4 on my list is A False Report by T. Christian Miller and Ken Armstrong. So this one I read, it was published in 2018, and I read it because I watched the Netflix series Unbelievable, which was a very well done series. And I went to read a little bit about it afterwards and found that that was based on this book. So I thought, oh, well, we all know that half the time the book is better or more detailed than whatever series, movie, whatever that they create. So I thought, oh, I'll give the book a try. And I'm so glad I did. It had enough variation from the series that it remained interesting. I didn't feel like I was reading exactly what I saw. I think it was much more detailed, and I think there were a lot of important aspects that were, I don't want to say left out, they were changed or slightly, dramatized maybe in the series for whatever reason. There were some things that they changed, and I have yet to figure out exactly why they felt that was necessary, but they did. And anyway, so the book follows this 18-year-old girl who had kind of grown up in the foster system, and she moved out on her own in Linwood, Washington. And in the early hours of the morning, someone broke into her apartment and raped her. And she reported it, and it kind of goes through her experience of the reporting process, and then how eventually they just decided to not believe her. And so it kind of goes through what she went through, like what was going on for her, and then also, later on, what kind of led them to actually investigate this further. I don't want to give too much away. I'm trying not to do any spoilers here. So anyways, just know that this happened. It's a real story, and this girl was not treated well by the Linwood police, and there were a couple of women police officers in Colorado that eventually kind of figured out that there was some problems going on with that case. So anyways, I really just don't want to give away too much, even though I could completely go into the whole thing, because it was slightly mortifying. The entire book was one of those that you walked away and you didn't know whether to be angry, heartbroken, or what. I felt such a wave of emotion with this story, both the series and the book. I would say the book more so than the series, but either way, another important subject, I think. So, and then the final one on my list, number 5, is kind of the odd one. So all of these books I've talked about so far are pretty heavy topics in one way or another. More of the investigative type of nonfiction book. The 5th one on my list is called The Castle on Sunset by Shawn Levy, and it is a biography of the Chateau Marmont on the Sunset Strip, and it is just super interesting. It talks about how the hotel was initially built as apartments in the late 1920s, and it kind of turned into this hotel where the famous could go. And while it wasn't necessarily the most glamorous or luxurious hotel on the Strip, it was certainly the most secretive. People could kind of come and go and get up to all sorts of shenanigans, and it was pretty well protected by the hotel staff. So, you know, a lot of really good sort of Hollywood stories, and just a little history about sort of the Los Angeles, Hollywood, Sunset Strip area. That one was probably more of a fun read, but it was good. It was another nonfiction that I really enjoyed, and I wanted to give you guys something that was a little more lighthearted. So those are my top 5, and like I said, I might share some other nonfiction a bit later on. Hopefully that's something that you guys are interested in. I really love talking about this and sharing it with you. And like I said earlier, you know, I want this channel to be about all sorts of interests. So while I'll probably mostly do the floss tube, I want to throw in some of these sort of booktube videos here and there as well. So we'll probably do a top 5 nonfiction next. So look out for that in the coming days, and happy stitching, happy reading, and we'll talk to you soon.